edible arrangements. And so I use this as an example all the time. When the pandemic hit, they had, everyone knows what edible arrangements is, right? You got some pretty daisy pineapples and all that kind of stuff. But when the pandemic hit, nobody's sending out that stuff anymore, right? Trying to figure out how we can find Lysol and masks and all that stuff, and no one's going to the grocery store. Well, they did something that was genius. They had produce. So they, instead of selling baskets, they started selling whole produce. Genius. And turned everything around. It was probably the best year that their franchisees have ever seen. But that's the type of, you have to be with the brand that's nimble, right? So they realized they had a problem, they had the solution, and their leadership team wasn't afraid to make a decision to stand by it, which I highly commend them for. And then set realistic expectations. If you've never worked in a restaurant, you have $10,000 in the bank, you are not gonna own a McDonald's today or tomorrow, right? It's just not gonna happen. So be realistic. I always recommend that you start small. So if you've never worked in franchising, you wanna get in, start with some, if it's food, let's just use food as an example. Don't tell Tanya I said that. But let's just use food as an example. If you wanna get into the restaurant business, start with a concept that has a pretty slender menu, right? So maybe it's ice cream or cookies, popcorn, right? Just so you can get to understand and get a feel for how a franchise system works. You wanna know that you are, again, able to follow a system, right? Because you might get into it and say, really not for me. But you wanna make sure that you're not overcomplicating the process while you're learning, because there's gonna be a learning curve. You don't wanna make it too complex on yourself. So you start small, start with one or two, ramp up, either continue to grow with that brand, or you start to diversify. You can take those, those funds, those profits, and put it towards something else, or you can continue to grow with the brand. I'm sure the brand would prefer that you continue to grow with them or one of their sister brands. And but I would say, just start small and give yourself grace, right? No one starts out at the top, right? Everybody's learning as they go and as they grow. So I would say, again, set realistic expectations. And then the due diligence piece. Tanya, you talked about this earlier, right? Conducting due diligence?
Well, yeah, it's part of,
It's part of the process?
Yeah.
So in the FDD that Tanya mentioned, there's a lot of information about the brand, the leadership, if there's any litigation that they've gone through. They provide you with information about existing and former franchisees, so contact information. Usually it's the phone numbers to like the store, wherever they might be working, so it might be hard to get a hold of them. But I would say spending 20 minutes with a franchisee is worth more than spending like 3 days with me, because they can talk about things that the brand cannot, right? The brand is confined to discussing what's in the disclosure document. The Federal Trade Commission really limits what can be shared. But a franchisee, they're gonna tell you everything. And if you catch them on the right day, you're gonna get an earful. But it's important that you talk to more than one, right? Because you may talk to someone who started with the brand 20 years ago. Well, 20 years ago, there was a totally different management team, right? And it might have been a lot smaller, maybe there was more hand-holding, and as it grew, there were more people, it got more complex. So talk to somebody that's been in the system for a while, someone that's kind of at the halfway mark, someone that maybe just entered 2 or 3 years ago. But then also, make sure you're talking to folks that might be at maybe a traditional development, non-traditional, which would be like an airport or university campus. So everybody's experience is gonna be different. So if you talk to just one person, just know you're talking to one person, and that's the only perspective, right? So that's why it's really important to have like a more holistic conversation about, okay, what is this brand about? Do you feel like you get the support that you need? Another question that I think is the most important question to ask is, if you could do this all over again, would you? Why not? That's gonna pretty much tell you everything you need to know. And if you ask that same question, or say you talk to 5 different franchisees, you're gonna get 5 different answers, and that way that's part of your due diligence process.